What's up guys, I'm Mr. Audio, and if you're new to the channel, welcome. This is part 2 of a 2-part mini-series, Processing Rock Drums in Ableton. Now in the first video, I went over the kick and snare pretty in-depth, how you can process them with stock plugins and layer your kicks appropriately, and what to look out for as well. This video is not going to be quite as long as that. There's not as much to go over, and I'm going to explain a few things about cymbals, and I'm going to show you a few tips and tricks. Let's get into it. First, let's go over a few things about cymbals. So, when I'm choosing cymbals for my production, I make sure I have the right sample for the production. This means I'm listening to my production and clicking on my different samples at the precise moment they're meant to be played. So it sounds in time with the production, and I can tell if the sample is right for the production. Now, sample selection for cymbals is very important because they're a very dominant sound. They're going to really occupy the top end. And that brings me to my next point. When I start a mix, I usually find the lowest of the lows and the highest of the highs. What instrument is responsible for each of those? Because there can only be one. You don't want two instruments fighting for the same space. You want to give each instrument their own place to shine in the stereo image and on the frequency spectrum. That being said, that is two places. Think of it like an XY graph, if that makes sense to you. My kicks are usually the lowest instrument, and the top end is usually carried by the cymbals. So for my hi-hats, my rides, and my main crash, I make sure they fit in the production first. That way it's a lot easier to process them. Now, after I've found the correct samples that fit in the production, I want to then further bring out the best in those cymbals, which means roll off the low lows that we don't need, boost the highs that we do, and probably add some New York style compression or some heavy parallel limiting. I prefer parallel limiting because when you drive audio into a limiter super hard, it distorts. Now what distorts first is the high end. It makes it really wispy and really nice touch of colors added to the high end. I particularly like what it does to cymbals. And I'm going to show you some audio examples here in a second. But first, let's talk about drummer's perspective and audience perspective. Alright, so my take on drummer's perspective and audience perspective is basically, a drummer's perspective is the arrangement if you were sitting at a drum kit. So your high toms here, your medium tom here, and your floor tom here. And then your main crash right here, your secondary crash right here, a ride here, hi-hats here, and then your snares, you're straddling it so it's in the center. All right, that being said, when you're playing the drums and you're playing them, you're going to hear the tom kind of over on the left side here and the floor tom way over on the left side, like it's in a different room and even kind of behind you. All right, that's normal if you're the drummer. That is a drastic move, and some productions call for that. But not every production needs that. So I try to listen to what the production needs. Sometimes I have stuff happening on the sides already, far left and far right, and the toms just don't fit quite right over there. So I pan them till they feel right in the production. It's really a taste thing. And then the cymbals, I never pan them far left or far right. It makes the production sound too lopsided. I pan them enough to where they're dominant on the side they're supposed to be dominant on. And then if it makes the production feel lopsided, what I'll do is I'll do a clever trick. I'll send it to a reverb, right? And pan that reverb the opposite direction. Now, the amount of audio you send to that reverb, the amount you pan the other way, and the amount of time during the pre-delay, you're going to have to mess around with and figure out what fits best for that production. The trick is to make it sound like it's kind of a reflection off the wall in the other ear. So it happens a little bit later, you know what I mean? So it's got a short, but, reasonably timed pre-delay to where you can audibly hear the pre-delay. You know what I mean? So try that if your production's feeling a bit lopsided, if you have a cymbal heavy part and you use drummer's perspective and it's decently drastic. But for panning, for the cymbals, I just pan like the main crash here, like maybe 14, and like Ableton's panning system is zeros in the center, 50 is all the way right, and negative 50 is all the way left, all right? So if I'm panning 14 to the right, it's just a little off center. If I'm panning, 8 or 9 to the left for my ride, and then 14 to 18 for the hi-hat, and then the crash somewhere in the middle, if I even need a crash for that production. So I almost never have a secondary crash in most of my productions unless I need a different flavor crash. Now, I often use a ride cymbal and an open hi-hat and a closed hi-hat, and sometimes even a half open hi-hat to kind of blend all three of those together and get kind of a good feel and kind of program a good groove. But I never pan my cymbals so drastic like I do the toms. Now, I don't always pan my toms very drastic in every production. Some productions I'm more narrow, and that's what I want to talk about is audience perspective next, all right? Audience perspective is like, personally, I prefer drummer's arrangement. So I'll always have that arrangement, you know, high toms all the way down to low toms over here. And, you know, my main crash, secondary crash, ride, hi-hats, you know, like that, laid out like that. But if I'm going to do an audience type of drum panning, I'll just kind of bring in my panning a bit closer to the center. See, what I consider audience perspective and drummer's perspective is the position of where the drums are in relation in the stereo mix. So like if you're in the audience, you're standing far from the drum set, your stereo field has narrowed drastically compared to if you were the drummer. So think about that. That's my take on drummer's perspective and audience perspective. Let me know your take in the comments. Anyway, let's get some audio examples of the cymbals and the toms. First we'll do cymbals and then we'll do the toms. Let's listen to what some parallel limiting and some EQ does to these cymbals here. So here's the cymbals without. I'm going to start right here. It sounds good, but I feel like it lacks top end, life, and color to sit right in the mix. Now, I haven't played it with the mix, and I will in a minute. But let's just listen to what this parallel limiting and EQ does to it in contrast to what we heard before. I'll toggle it on in the middle of it, and you'll notice the difference it makes. So here's with it off. As you can see, it adds tons of life and color to those cymbals, and it really puts them in the top end without having too much low end in there, muddying up the mix. All right, now let's listen to it in the mix with and without. So here's without, and then I'll toggle on the effect rack in the middle of the performance. As you can see, without that effect rack on, it kind of sounds dull and lifeless. It adds so much to this mix by just doing that to the cymbals. It's crazy. And as you can see, I didn't do much of anything else to these cymbals. I just kind of put it in its spot on the frequency spectrum and in the stereo image, and it made the mix better. It's that simple. You don't have to do much to cymbals. I processed them as a group even too. I just kind of did a broad stroke of processing over the cymbals and it made the mix better. Now, I'm not saying you should do this for every production and just kind of group your cymbals together, but that's what I did for this one because the production didn't call for any craziness. It doesn't make the production feel lopsided at all because they're only panned a little bit off center. I don't have the need to make that reverb send and pan a little off the other way. Although I did do that for this video. Let's look. First, let's listen to the drum droop without the reverb, and then I'll throw the reverb on. And remember, it's only on the main crash, so you're only going to hear it once every 4 bars. So wait for that 4th bar to come through. See how it was kind of like an echo in the left ear a little bit after you hit it over here? That's kind of a cool effect, and it made the production feel less lopsided. Although this production really didn't call for it, I wanted to show something in the video, and it made this production a little bit cooler. So I'm going to leave it in there. Anyway, let's move along to toms, and I'm going to show you how I removed all these resonant frequencies. All right, so basically, toms, you want to remove the resonant frequencies that are going to interfere with your production. Now, that could take a lot of EQing, and by a lot, I mean I have 4 EQ8s loaded up in this. I'm not saying I probably needed all of those, but I just kind of processed each stage and tried to make it sound more like I wanted to, and then eventually I ended up with this final result. Let's listen. So here's the final result, and I'll turn off the effect rack, and you'll hear a drastic change. All right, so when you hear that drastic change and it just sounds too big and boomy, you'll know. All right, now let's break down these EQs and my thought process behind it. And hopefully this gives you a better understanding of how you can process your own sampled toms. Let's check it out. So let's turn all these off except for the first one. So we're going to solo out just the toms and listen to only the toms by themselves while I turn these EQs on, and then I'm going to explain my thought process and what I was thinking creating these EQs. As you can see right away, I wanted to move kind of a broad stroke of low end, but not too much low end, not enough for like a low shelf. As you can see, the second EQ made it a little bit more fat in the low end, kind of tightened it up and made it more transient oriented, kind of pushed the shape of it up more towards the high mids. As you can see, that third EQ removes a ton of resonant frequencies there. It's got two really deep notches, and also I'm removing some low end and some high end. It's just removing a whole bunch of stuff. And with Ableton's drum bus, I'm able to add a little bit more boom, but it's controlled. Now let's listen to what this EQ is doing. As you can see, shaping the low end a bit more and removing a little bit of the fundamental because it was getting a little bit too resonant. Now, let's check out what this glue compressor is doing to kind of finalize the processing of these toms. As you can see, it just adds a little bit more fatness and really glues the whole performance together. All right, now let's check this out in the mix. Without vocals, obviously, so you can hear the performance. And there you have it. In these last two videos, I think we've covered the kick, the snare, cymbals, toms, drummer's perspective, audience perspective, different styles of panning, how to layer your kicks, pretty much anything you need to know to process programmed drums. Now in the next drum series, it'll be mic'd drums, and I'm sure I'll be going as in-depth as I went in this video, and I'm sure they'll be a lot longer because there's so much more to go over with live drums I can't even begin to explain in this video. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys, and as you know, there's some links down in the description for free Ableton racks, and I got some updates coming to those soon. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Mr. Audio, out.